Hello there, my name's Vanessa Smedley and I'm a painter. Well, as you can possibly tell by the foreshadowing of the color of my shirt, today we are going to paint a lovely autumn scene, or fall as we call it here in Oklahoma. Our trees have finally started turning colors. I mean, it's early November, takes a bit for us here. So we are going to paint this lovely fall scene right here. It's from a photo that I took last year in one of my favorite parks. So let's do this. Here are the materials for this week. If you want to, you can screenshot that, or they're listed in the description of the video for you. I'm going to start out by masking off the little couple right here with masking fluid, and then also the bench, because those are going to be lighter than the rest of everything else and I don't want them to get lost. And as always, I am using a cheap brush and I am dipping that into a mixture of water and dish soap before I dip it into the masking fluid, because otherwise it ruins your brushes, folks. While that's drying, I'm going to go ahead and mix up a bunch of colors. So I'm starting with lemon yellow, mixing in a little bit of cadmium yellow. Then I have yellow ochre, and then cadmium orange mixed with a little bit of ultramarine blue. Then we have some burnt sienna, and then some cadmium yellow mixed with cobalt blue. Then I'm going to mix the same two colors but a little bit more blue. On this one I'm going to mix cadmium yellow with cobalt blue. I'm going to go real heavy on the cobalt and then add Payne's gray. I like to let my masking fluid dry for at least an hour, so I've done that, and now I'm coming back in with a Hake brush and I'm wetting the entire surface. Then we're going to begin to drop in all of those colors we mixed up front. The yellow is going to be a really strong feature in this composition. It's going to draw your eye directly to right above that couple, so it's going to be very important. So I'm coming in very, very strongly with that yellow, and I'm going to paint everything else around it. I'm going to go ahead and sweep in a very light cobalt blue into the sky area and just going to let that spread. The next color I'm adding here is my medium green. I have one that's more yellow, one that's a little more blue, and then one that has a lot of blue and very dark. This is the medium one. So I'm just adding that in there, and I'm kind of just splotching it in there with a small brush in order to mimic the leaves here. And then I'm just letting that spread as I add more colors. While this is still wet, I'm actually going to use that exact same color to sweep along the entire lawn area with the Hake brush, only I'm skipping around some areas of yellow that I did for some sunlight patches on the lawn as well. And now I'm coming back in with my orange that I mixed, and I'm dropping that into the little orangey areas. I'm using burnt sienna as well for the shadow areas along those leaves. And now I'm using a pretty light concentration of that darkest green to add in some of the shadow areas. Up overhead we have the trees that are closest to us, so I'm using my darkest green on the right side where those pine needles are going to be, and then on the other side we have this tree that's overhanging, and I'm using all of those colors because it has all of the colors in its little leaves. Now that all of that has dried, I'm coming back in and I'm darkening some things up and adding some shadows. We're going to make things darker around the couple, and hopefully that will draw more attention to them because they're going to be lighter than the stuff that's around their heads there. And then with my various greens, I'm going to go ahead and add in a little bit more definition here, but then I'm going to spray it with a spray bottle to diffuse it because I don't want to lose all of that nice blurry nature of the background. Mix up some burnt umber and some Payne's gray, and we're going to use that for all of these tree trunks. Firstly, we're going to water it down quite a bit and use it in the background for all of the tree trunks that are in the distance. They're going to be lighter because they're in the distance, so we're watering that down a little bit. foreground needs some texture, so I'm using a very dry mixture on my brush, turning it on its side, and I am scraping it along the hills of the paper, and that is affording me a little bit of grass texture here. If you need a refresher course on how to dry brush, you can click the link above. I've allowed that to dry, and now I am going to come back in with all this leaf texture, and it's going to look really severe up front, but when we add in some of the other darker colors, it won't look quite as crazy as it does right now. But rather than paint in every single leaf here, which would take 18 ages, I'm just dry brushing in kind of a generalized texture with that, with a lighter mixture of that brown. I'm using my darkest green to do these bushes that are right next to this closest tree. So I'm starting out with that color, and then I'm going to come back in with more and more Payne's gray to add in the shadows, especially towards the bottom, but also the little shadows in between the boughs. I'm going to add in some more detail to this tree that's kind of hanging over the viewer's head. We're going to do this much darker than the rest of it because it's more vibrant, because it is closer to us. But I'm not going to paint in every single leaf because I think this is an oak tree. I'm certainly not going to put in oak tree like shaped leaves, but I am putting in a generalized kind of leaf shape with my dark green, my light green, yellow, the orange, and then the burnt sienna as well, because it's darker, because it's closer to us, and it's also in shadow. And then I'm adding in more Payne's gray to my burnt umber mixture, and I'm adding in all of the branches. I start out with a number 8 round for the largest of the branches, but then I go to a number 4 round for those tiny little wispy ones. This is still damp as I'm putting in the branches, and I think it looks a little bit more natural that way because they kind of meld in with the leaves around them. But also, as I'm painting a branch, sometimes I skip an area so that it can appear that some of the foliage is coming over the top of that branch. That will look more natural that way. Now that the paint on these bushes at the base of the tree has had a chance to kind of soak into the paper but not be completely dry, I am coming in with a palette knife and I'm scraping in some branch textures here. If you do this while it's still quite wet, you'll actually make a darker line because the paint will be drawn into that little injury to the paper. If you do it after the paint has had a chance to soak into the paper and there's still a little bit of a sheen there, it will actually create a lighter line, like it will take it back to kind of the color of the paper. If you wait too late, where there's no sheen whatsoever, it will have no effect at all. So in this case, I wanted a lighter line, so I did it kind of halfway in between. And my advice to you is to experiment a little bit on a separate sheet of paper. I've mixed up the thickest, darkest consistency of my darkest green possible, and I'm adding that in really, really thick right here, then adding in Payne's gray on the top of it for the shadow areas. And then I switched to a number 4 round to add a few evergreen needle type textures along the edge. And then I'm bringing back in my palette knife to scrape in a few lighter kind of needly textures. I've added a little bit of Payne's gray to my burnt umber mixture, and I am painting in this big tree trunk here, painting around some of the foliage on the bushes and things like that, adding in these smaller little branches. Then I clean my brush and lift out a little bit of that paint for the light side of it. And now I'm just going to do the same thing that I did on the top left hand of the painting and add in a bunch of these multicolored leaves that are in here. Time to remove the masking fluid, so use a rubber cement eraser for that really quick. For the bench, I'm using a nice watery cobalt blue to fill in all of the highlight areas because it's reflecting from the sky, so it's blue. Then it's time to start working on the couple. So for his shirt, I just use a nice watery Payne's gray. And then for their faces, I'm going to water down a little bit of burnt umber. And I'm just going to fill that in nice and lightly for now. And then later, after all that dries, we'll come back in and give them more detail. Adding in just straight Payne's gray for the black parts of this lovely iron bench. I'm just using Payne's gray for their hair, just adding that straight in there like that. And then I'm going to use Cobalt Blue and a little bit of a mixture of indigo blue for the jeans on the dude here. A little bit of darker Payne's gray for the shadow on his shirt. And I've mixed some Alizarin Crimson with some nice burnt umber to fill in her nice burgundy jacket here. And oh my goodness, her legs were a little bit too wet and the red bled down onto her legs, which is not a great look, so she gets jeans, yay! I'm gonna go ahead and add some of the red of her jacket in here for some red leaves here and there, just because it looks a little funny to me just being in that one spot hanging out by itself, just for some consistency. Now in order to draw more attention to them, I'm going to go ahead and darken up this background area just because I feel like it needs that contrast, and then I'm going to tone down a little bit of the yellow in some other areas other than right above their head because I feel like that will draw more attention to them. Now that all of that has dried, I'm coming back in with the yellow soft pastel and I'm adding even more emphasis to the area right above their heads because I feel like that's going to draw the eye down towards them. While we have our pastels out, we're going to add some more details here and there in the trees here with some leaves. We're going to add a little bit more yellow to the sun-kissed areas on the grass. And then I'm going to take an off-white and I'm going to add in the lighter leaves that are laying on the ground. And then I'm going to use a nice light blue colored pencil to add in some more of the shine and the detail on the bench. A little bit darker around the edges to give it a little bit more definition. And then we're done. So here is the finished painting, all dried and with the tape removed, and that was a quite detailed one, but I do love the effect. And there you have it, a cozy fall scene to begin the season. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, all of that stuff, because that's how this channel gets to grow. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again in 2 weeks.